The hiss of long-range radio static was the only sound in the concrete bunker. It was 03:14 on the morning of January 5, 1944. Feldwebel, Sergeant Ernst Lischke, his hands numb, adjusted the tuner on his Telefunken E52 receiver. He commanded a small Funkhorch Company radio intercept station perched on the cliffs of Pas de Calais, its steel antennas straining against the freezing Channel wind. His mission was simple: listen. He tracked the movements of Allied night fighter squadrons and bomber streams, logging their chatter for the Luftflotte 3 archives. For months, the work had been routine. But at 03:15, something violated the pattern. An American voice, clear and unhurried, cut through the noise. It was a lead navigator in a B-17 formation, call sign Doghouse Lead. He was speaking to his wingmen, redirecting them from their primary target, a rail yard near Amiens, to a secondary target of opportunity. Lischke's pencil froze. The American navigator read out a new set of coordinates. Lischke checked his own logs. He felt a prickle of impossible recognition. The coordinates were not a factory. They were not a bridge. They were an empty patch of ocean in the Bay of Biscay. Lischke knew this because, 45 minutes earlier, he had also intercepted a German signal, encrypted by the unbreakable Enigma M3, diverting the U-boat U-953 to exactly that same patch of ocean for an emergency refueling. The American bomber stream was being sent to hunt a submarine whose location was known only to German high command. Lischke noted the discrepancy in his log, his entry precise and clinical, though his hand trembled slightly. He finished his shift as the gray dawn broke, the bombers long gone. He filed his report. He did not know that his small anomaly, a single stray signal, had just landed on the desk of an analyst in Berlin. The old belief, held by the entire German high command, was that Allied reconnaissance, while excellent, was reactive. This log entry suggested something else. It suggested the Allies were not just masters of radar, but masters of prophecy. The intruder wasn't an aircraft, it was a suspicion, a catastrophic realization that the war's most fundamental secret, the security of the Enigma machine, was a lie. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the hidden battles of the war, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Major Klaus Reinhardt, an analyst within the Funkabwehr, the signals defense branch of the Abwehr, read the Calais report under the weak light of his Berlin office lamp. It was cold in the Tirpitzufer headquarters. Coal was rationed, even for military intelligence. Reinhardt was a man defined by methodical patience. He did not believe in luck, and he did not believe in coincidence. The Calais report was neither. He placed it on a growing pile of similar reports, whispers gathered from every front. He pulled a file from December 1943. The sinking of the battleship Scharnhorst. The Royal Navy had intercepted it with perfect, impossible precision in the dark of the Arctic night, converging on its exact position as if drawn by a magnet. The Scharnhorst had been operating under radio silence, its only communications being encrypted, Enigma signals back to Naval Command in Norway. He pulled another file, the U-boat war. After the brief success of the Happy Time, the wolf packs were now being systematically exterminated. Black May of 1943 had seen 41 U-boats lost, a rate the Kriegsmarine could not sustain. Grand Admiral Dönitz insisted the cause was new Allied centimeter band radar, an airborne device that could spot a conning tower in the dark. But radar couldn't explain everything. It couldn't explain how Allied destroyer groups anticipated U-boat movements, arriving at refueling rendezvous points that were transmitted only 24 hours prior. It couldn't explain how Allied bombers, time and time again, hit specific, non-obvious targets. A single locomotive works in occupied Belgium, a specific command bunker in Italy, a ball-bearing factory in Schweinfurt that was critical to the entire war machine. Spies could not move that fast. Resistance fighters could not gather this scope of operational intelligence. Allied reconnaissance aircraft were good, but they could not see the future. Reinhardt stared at the map, covered in red pins. The pattern was too clear. The only common denominator, the single thread that connected the Scharnhorst in the Arctic, the U-boats in the Atlantic, and the rail yards in France, was the machine sitting on his own desk. The Enigma. But to voice this suspicion was heresy. It was tantamount to accusing the entire High Command, OKW, of catastrophic incompetence. The entire German war effort, the Blitzkrieg, the U-boat strategy, the air defense of the Reich, was built on the doctrine of secure, rapid communication. To suggest it was compromised was not just a technical assessment. It was an act of treason. He looked again at the Calais report. The coordinates matched perfectly. The Allies hadn't stumbled upon U-95A3. They were sent to kill it. Reinhardt felt a profound intellectual sickness. The problem wasn't that the Allies were winning. The problem was that the Germans were telling them how. What he didn't know was that this suspicion would pit him against the most powerful and dangerous men in the Third Reich. The German faith in the Enigma machine was not just policy. It was mathematical dogma. Developed in the 1920s by Arthur Scherbius, it was an electromechanical marvel. Its system of 3 and later 4 rotating rotors, combined with a plug board, Steckerbrett, that swapped letters before they even entered the rotor mechanism, created a polyalphabetic cipher of staggering complexity. The number of possible keys was not in the millions, but in the quintillions. A standard Wehrmacht Enigma offered 158, 962, 555, 217, 826, 360 $0 possible configurations. It was, German engineers concluded, a statistical impossibility to break. A brute force attack, even with thousands of codebreakers, would take longer than the age of the universe. This mathematical certainty was the bedrock of German High Command. They had built their entire command structure upon it. The Kriegsmarine used it to coordinate wolf packs across the vast, empty Atlantic. The Luftwaffe used it to direct fighter wings and bomber fleets. The Heer, Army, used it to coordinate the complex dance of panzer divisions on the Eastern Front. It was the central nervous system of the Reich. The Funkabwehr, Reinhardt's own division, had tested the machine repeatedly. Their conclusions, filed in official reports to the OKW, were always the same. The Enigma, when used according to procedure, is impenetrable. They focused their energy not on their own vulnerabilities, but on the enemy's. The B-Dienst, Naval Cryptographic Service, had famously broken the Royal Navy's main operational cipher, Naval Cipher No. 3, in 1940, leading to devastating successes against Allied convoys. This early success bred a fatal arrogance. The Germans assumed that because they could break British ciphers, and the British, they assumed, could not break theirs, they possessed an inherent cryptographic superiority. They attributed Allied successes to other fields. The British Huff Duff, high-frequency direction-finding system, which allowed ships to get a bearing on any U-boat that used its radio, was a known threat. Allied radar technology was advancing. Allied spies were, admittedly, effective. But these were tactical problems. The strategic security of the Reich's innermost thoughts, encrypted by Enigma, was never questioned. Any suggestion that the Allies were reading Enigma traffic was dismissed as paranoia, or, worse, an excuse for failure in the field. This was the wall Klaus Reinhardt now faced. Not a wall of steel, but a wall of institutional certainty, built from the brick and mortar of mathematical hubris. That hubris had a price, and it was paid in steel, fuel, and human lives. The most brutal accounting was kept by the Befehlshaber der U-Boote, commander of the U-boats, Karl Dönitz. His men, the gray wolves of the Atlantic, had gone from being the hunters to the hunted. The period German sailors called the first happy time in 1940 was a distant memory. Now the Atlantic was a graveyard. By mid-1943, the human cost had become unsustainable. The U-boat force had a casualty rate approaching 75%, the highest of any service in the German military. Young men, most barely out of their teens, were sealed into pressurized steel tubes and sent into an ocean where survival was measured in weeks. The Funkabwehr reports that landed on Reinhardt's desk were grim. They spoke of U-boats being attacked just hours after surfacing to transmit their required status reports. They described encounters not with random patrols, but with hunter-killer groups of destroyers and specialized aircraft that seemed to know where the U-boat would be. On board those submarines, the reality was a living nightmare. The first warning was often the sudden, terrifying ping, ping, ping of British ASDIC, the sonar bouncing off their hull. Then came the depth charges. Men crammed into the control room would grip the bulkheads, their knuckles white, as the explosions bracketed them. The boat would shudder violently, throwing men from their bunks. Light bulbs would shatter, plunging the interior into darkness, lit only by the blue emergency lamps. Water would spray from stressed rivets. The air, thick with the smell of diesel, sweat, and fear, would grow hotter. The final moments, described in the few survivor reports, were of a catastrophic failure. The sudden screech of metal tearing, the roar of incoming water, and the final crushing pressure of the deep. Dönitz, a loyal officer, blamed this disaster on the enemy's technological prowess, specifically the new 10-centimeter radar that his own detectors couldn't pick up. He authorized frantic technological countermeasures, radar-absorbent coatings, new advanced torpedoes, the Schnorchel snorkel device. But he never, not once, blamed the Enigma machine that carried his orders. He had personally assured the Führer it was secure. To admit it was broken would be to admit that he himself had personally sent thousands of his boys to their deaths. The institution could not face this truth. Experts agreed the machine could not be broken. Major Klaus Reinhardt was not a product of the Nazi Party. He was a product of the old Prussian military tradition, tempered by an academic mind. Born in 1898, the son of a mathematics professor at the University of Heidelberg, Reinhardt had served as a very young lieutenant in the Imperial German Army's signals service during the First World War. He had sat in muddy trenches, listening to British Morse code, learning the embryonic art of radio intelligence. He saw firsthand how a single intercepted message could cost a battalion its life. The experience left him with a lifelong respect for the invisible war, the war of ciphers, intercepts, and analysis. After the armistice, he left the decimated army and, like many former signals officers, found work at the Reichspost, the German Postal and Telecommunications Ministry. There, he worked not as a soldier, but as a mathematician, studying the emerging field of cryptographic security. He was quiet, meticulous, and preferred the company of textbooks to people. He distrusted loud ideologies, believing that fanaticism was the enemy of clear thought. When the Wehrmacht was reborn, he was recalled to service and placed within the Abwehr, the military intelligence service headed by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris. Reinhardt was an analyst, not a spy. His job was to find patterns in the static, to protect Germany's secrets by understanding how others might steal them. He was one of the few who understood that any system designed by a human could be broken by one. His skepticism made him an outsider. While his colleagues saw the Enigma as a perfect fortress, Reinhardt saw it as a complex lock. And he knew that all locks, given the right key, could be picked. This analytical coldness put him at odds with the new powers rising in Berlin. By late 1943, the Abwehr was being systematically undermined by the Sicherheitsdienst, SD, the intelligence wing of the SS. The Abwehr, under Canaris, was seen as old-fashioned, academic, and potentially disloyal. The SD, under Himmler and Walter Schellenberg, was radical, brutal, and politically motivated. In the SD's worldview, failure was always the result of treason, not technical inferiority. Reinhardt was now a man walking a tightrope. He was a technical expert in an age of political fanaticism, a man of numbers in an empire built on blood. And he was about to use his numbers to prove that the entire empire was exposed. The insight arrived not as a flash of brilliance, but as a slow, creeping dread. Reinhardt sat in his office, the Calais report of January 5th on top of the stack. The Scharnhorst file was next. The U-boat losses were beneath. The evidence was overwhelming, but it was all circumstantial. The Allies were lucky. Their radar was good. Their spies were plentiful. These were the official explanations. These were the lies the High Command told itself. Reinhardt knew he could not prove his theory with paper. He needed to create an event. He needed a controlled experiment. He needed to set a trap, using the Enigma itself as bait. The operation he conceived was simple, elegant, and profoundly dangerous. It was a barium operation, a term for sending false information through a high-level channel to see if the enemy reacted. He needed to transmit a high-priority, Enigma-only message to a specific, observable location. The message had to be a lie, but a lie the Allies would find irresistible. And then he had to watch. He drafted a proposal and took it to his superior, a general in the OKW Signals Command. The reaction was not skepticism, it was fury. "Major," the general said, his voice dangerously quiet, "are you suggesting, in an official capacity, that the Reichsführer SS and the Führer himself are operating with compromised intelligence? That our entire command network is an open book?" Reinhardt stood stiffly. "General, I am suggesting that the U-boat losses are not sustainable. I am suggesting the Scharnhorst was led to a slaughter. The evidence demands we test the hypothesis." The general slammed his hand on the desk. "This is defeatist paranoia. Your hypothesis borders on treason. The Enigma is secure. You will cease this line of inquiry immediately. Burn this memo. Consider yourself fortunate this conversation is not being reported to the SD." Reinhardt had his answer. He could not get official approval. The system could not investigate its own failure. If he was to run this test, he would have to do it alone, in secret. It was a terrifying decision. By falsifying a high-level Enigma transmission, he would be committing a capital crime. But if he was right, the war was already being lost, one encrypted message at a time. He burned the memo as ordered, but he did not abandon the plan. Reinhardt knew he needed two things: a secure location for the test and an ally he could trust. The front lines in France or Russia were too chaotic, too saturated with variables. He needed a quiet sector, somewhere he could control the environment. He used his authority as an Abwehr analyst to arrange an inspection tour of coastal defenses, requisitioning a Ju-52 transport plane. He flew not to France, but to the remote, wind-swept coast of occupied Norway, north of Trondheim. The fjords here were deep, cold, and strategically quiet, home to isolated Kriegsmarine weather stations and coastal artillery batteries. His ally was Korvettenkapitän, corvette captain, Hannes Strasser, the 50-year-old commander of the Fjellhamar Coastal Battery. Strasser was a veteran of the Great War, a man who detested the SS and the Berlin Party functionaries. He had lost his son on a U-boat in the Atlantic. He was a tired, angry man who trusted only what he could see. Reinhardt found him in the battery's command bunker, overlooking a gray, empty sea. Reinhardt laid out his suspicion. He didn't use political arguments, only facts. The U-boat losses, the Scharnhorst, the Calais intercept. Strasser listened, his face impassive. "You are telling me," Strasser said finally, "that my boy, that they read the orders that sent him to his grid?" "I am telling you," Reinhardt replied, "that we must find out." Strasser was silent for a full minute. "What do you need?" The plan was simple. Strasser's battery had its own Enigma machine, operating on the local Kriegsmarine quay for the Norwegian coast. They would draft a message reporting a high-value target. Not a downed pilot, too small. Not a damaged capital ship, too unbelievable. They would report a stranded Allied merchant ship, a straggler from an Arctic convoy, crippled by engine failure and hiding in a specific nearby fjord. Its fictional cargo, critical tank components for the Red Army. It was a target the Royal Navy had to protect, and the Kriegsmarine had to sink. Reinhardt and Strasser designated a precise grid square in the center of the fjord. They set up an observation post on the cliffside, equipped with powerful Zeiss binoculars and a field telephone connected to the bunker. They would transmit the signal, and then they would wait. The tension was palpable. They were about to lie to their own high command, hoping the enemy was listening in. On a moonless night, the radio operator at Fjellhamar Battery began tapping out the message. The signal, encoded by the Enigma M3, was routed to Kriegsmarine Command in Bergen. Grid CA-4290. Stranded freighter, 8,000 tons, damaged, high-priority target, request U-boat or air assets. The message was encrypted, secure, and a complete fabrication. In the observation post, Reinhardt and Strasser began their vigil. The fjord below was a ribbon of black water between towering cliffs. The air was so cold it burned to breathe. 1 hour passed. Nothing. 2 hours. Strasser checked his watch. "Perhaps, Major, your theory is wrong. Perhaps they are just sleeping." Reinhardt kept his binoculars fixed on the mouth of the fjord. "We wait." At the 3-hour mark, Strasser's field telephone buzzed. It was the battery's sound detector operator. "Sir, aircraft engines. Bearing 090. High altitude." Reinhardt and Strasser scanned the sky. Minutes later, a shadow passed across the stars. It was a British Sunderland flying boat, a long-range patrol aircraft. It was flying a precise search pattern, back and forth, directly over the fictional grid square. It circled for 20 minutes, then vanished to the east. Strasser was visibly shaken. "They patrol here. It's a coincidence." "They patrol the coast," Reinhardt said, his voice flat. "They do not patrol a landlocked fjord at 4 a.m. unless they are looking for something." The real proof came with the dawn. As the gray light filled the fjord, a new shape appeared at its mouth. It was low, fast, and gray. Then another. 2 Royal Navy destroyers, tribal class, slicing through the water. They weren't patrolling. They were charging. They steamed directly to the grid coordinates, found nothing, circled in confusion, and then, receiving new orders, turned and steamed back out to sea. In the bunker, Strasser slowly lowered his binoculars. He looked at Reinhardt, his face pale. There was no convoy to protect. There was no other target in 200 miles. They had come for the ship. They had come for the lie. Reinhardt felt no triumph, only the crushing weight of certainty. "They read it," Strasser whispered. "Gott in Himmel. They read it all. If stories of these hidden turning points fascinate you, stay with us. The next chapter of wartime innovation might change how you see the war." The barium test in Norway was an unauthorized, successful, and catastrophic experiment. When Reinhardt returned to Berlin, he found he had been summoned. His inspection tour had been flagged, and the unusual signal traffic from Fjellhamar had been cross-referenced with the Royal Navy's sudden, pointless sortie. He was not brought before a military tribunal. That would require a public record. He was brought to a small, secure conference room at OKW headquarters in Zosen. The men waiting for him were not his Abwehr superiors. They were officers from the Sicherheitsdienst, SD, and a stony-faced Gestapo liaison. They already had his file. "Major Reinhardt," the senior SD officer, a brigade Führer, began. "You have been busy. You have taken it upon yourself to falsify high command signals. You have revealed operational security procedures to the enemy." Reinhardt realized this was not an investigation. It was an execution, political if not literal. He had no choice but to present his findings. He laid it all out: the Calais intercept, the Scharnhorst data, the mathematical certainty of the U-boat losses, and finally, the Fjellhamar test. "The destroyers were not on patrol," Reinhardt stated, his voice steady. "They were not there by coincidence. They were reacting to an Enigma transmission that was less than 6 hours old. The only possible conclusion is that Naval Enigma, key Triton, is compromised." The brigade Führer smiled, a thin, cold expression. "Your conclusion is flawed, Major. You assume the enemy is not clever. You assume there is no British spy in Captain Strasser's command. You assume you are the only one smart enough to see a pattern. A spy," Reinhardt countered, "could not have gotten that message from Fjellhamar to the Royal Navy and mobilized 2 destroyers in under 6 hours. The leak is not human. It is systemic. It is the machine." This was the critical moment. The SD officer leaned forward. "The machine, Major, was designed by German engineers. It has been approved by German mathematicians. It is secured by German discipline. What you are suggesting is that the British are, fundamentally, superior. This is an idea we do not tolerate. It is defeatism." Reinhardt stood his ground. "This is not about superiority. It is about a flaw. If we do not find it, if we do not change our entire cryptographic system today, we will lose the invasion in France. We will lose the war." The room was silent. Reinhardt had said the unsayable. The SD officer closed his folder. "Your concern for the Reich is noted, Major, but your methods are rogue. You are relieved of your duties at the Funkabwehr. You will be reassigned, where your analytical skills are less likely to cause disruption." He was placed under house arrest, pending his transfer. His report was classified, stamped Geheime Reichssache, top secret, and buried in an archive. The real test of Klaus Reinhardt's warning was not a controlled experiment. It was the largest amphibious invasion in human history. While Reinhardt was sidelined, his report sat in a filing cabinet. The German military, fractured by internal rivalries, failed to act with one voice. The Kriegsmarine, deeply shaken by the U-boat losses and now armed with Reinhardt's data, did act. In early 1944, they introduced the new Enigma M4, the Triton, adding a 4th rotor. This single change plunged Bletchley Park's U-boat tracking room into darkness. For a time, the U-boats were safe again, but the Heer, Army, and the Luftwaffe did not follow suit. They were convinced their own Enigma procedures were different enough, secure enough. They were wrong. On June 6, 1944, the real test began. As Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, the German command structure was paralyzed. Field Marshal Rommel, commanding Army Group B, was blind. The Allies, through Operation Fortitude, had run the ultimate barium operation, convincing the Germans that the real invasion was coming at Pas de Calais, exactly where Sergeant Lischke had been listening 5 months earlier. And the Allies knew the deception was working, because they were reading the German Enigma messages confirming it. They read the panicked reports from Normandy. They read the orders holding the 15th Army in Calais, waiting for a phantom invasion. They read the fuel requests, the ammunition shortages, and the reinforcement schedules for the panzer divisions. When Rommel finally tried to move his tanks to counterattack at Normandy, Allied fighter bombers were waiting for them. The Allied air superiority was not just a matter of numbers. It was a matter of foreknowledge. Every encrypted order Rommel sent was read by the Allies, often within hours. The roads to Normandy became a turkey shoot. The German 7th Army was encircled and annihilated in the Falaise pocket. The combat test of Reinhardt's theory was the complete destruction of the German defense of France. His warning, ignored by the generals in Zossen, had been proven correct, not by a report, but by the collapse of an entire front. The historical consequence of this ignored warning was the acceleration of the end of the war. The secret of ultra, the Allied designation for intelligence derived from Enigma and other high-level ciphers, was the single most important factor in the Allied victory, shortening the war by an estimated 2 years and saving countless lives. The German High Command, however, never fully grasped the extent of the penetration. To the very end, they blamed their failures on spies, material shortages, Allied air power, and the treason of their own generals. They could not, or would not, accept that their most sacred technological idol was hollow. Even in their post-war memoirs, captured German generals like Albert Kesselring and Heinz Guderian still attributed their defeats to conventional military factors, never once mentioning the cryptographic catastrophe that had exposed their every move. The truth was simply too total and too humiliating to accept. The secret of Bletchley Park and the breaking of Enigma was held so closely by the Allies that it was not declassified until the 1970s. For 30 years, the world believed the myth of the unbreakable machine. And what of Major Klaus Reinhardt? His story, like that of many who spoke truth to power in a totalitarian state, vanished from the official record. After his reassignment, he was transferred to a Strafbataillon, a penal battalion, and sent to the Eastern Front, a common fate for officers who had fallen out of favor. His name appeared on a single casualty list from the brutal final Battle of Berlin in April 1945. He died in the rubble, his warnings buried with him. His legacy was not a medal or a monument, but the silent, unread report in a captured archive, a testament to a man who saw the truth, but could not make anyone listen. Today, our world is built on a foundation of digital encryption. We trust algorithms 1,000 times more complex than Enigma to protect our bank accounts, our government secrets, and our private communications. We have enshrined this technology as the new, unbreakable dogma. But the story of Enigma and the ignored warning of Klaus Reinhardt is not simply a lesson in cryptography. It is a timeless lesson in human hubris. It teaches us that the greatest vulnerability is often not in the machine, but in the mind of the user. The true failure was not the Enigma's mathematical flaw. It was the institutional refusal to question a core belief. The OKW and the SD were so invested in the idea of their own technological and intellectual superiority that they were blind to the evidence of their failure, evidence that was floating in the cold Atlantic and burning on the roads to Normandy. Reinhardt's crime was not his unauthorized test. His crime was his willingness to be right when the entire power structure needed him to be wrong. He dared to suggest the system was fallible, and the system destroyed him for it. The concrete observation bunker on the Norwegian coast still stands, its empty windows staring out at the fjord, slowly crumbling into the sea. It is a silent witness, not to a battle fought with guns, but to a warning that was delivered and ignored. Every complex system has a flaw, often hidden in the assumptions of its creators. Every great idea begins as an act of defiance against impossibility. What impossible ideas, or uncomfortable truths, do you think could change the world?